Hey there, Sheryl here. Today is a very special day. I am with Latisha M. Roberson of Accenture. Latisha, thank you so much for being here. You have no idea how excited I am for this conversation.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
So, of course, I think I've been trying to track you down for a while, and I'm so glad you took time out of your busy schedule. And so there's all sorts of things to talk about today in the inclusion and diversity space, and as well as all the amazing things that you're up to. But before we hop in and we learn a little bit about actionable things that we can do, because we talked earlier before we went live that there is an increased awareness, but maybe there's not as much increased action or progress. So we're going to be talking about that from your perspective, and also having some more actionable tools so we can actually do a better job of shifting cultures. But before we get into that, I want to ask you, the theme of these lives is has to do with mindset and memories that you have. So is there something that shaped you as a young person that made you a real advocate and fighter for change, or that shaped how you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's one that I think about often. So growing up, I, was very money conscious, right? So not that I ever wanted for anything, because my parents did an amazing job of giving me everything that I asked for, but I was aware that money didn't grow on trees, right? I mean, that's something that I heard from my parents all the time. Money doesn't grow on trees. So I knew the importance of being financially independent, which has led to a lot that's happening right now into my mindset and how I am. I mean, I attended college because I had a full scholarship. Otherwise, don't know if I'd have been able to do that. I've been working since I was 15 years old. Like, can't remember a time that I haven't worked. So it's always been one of those things where I've just felt like, as I progress within my career, like in order to, be self-sustainable and financially stable, like you got to have a career and you got to grow in your career. But now it's more about, wealth creation and sustainability and growth, which is why it's so important for us as women, to really understand equal pay and to really know our worth, and, to really be able to negotiate and have those conversations. So, I tie all that back to, this whole thing about, wanting to be independent, financially independent, but it's helped me in so many different ways. So childhood memory is money don't grow on trees, right? So just asking for anything. And now that I'm a mom, right, I find myself saying that a lot, but kids are a lot smarter now, because now my daughter go, well, actually it does, because, money's made out of paper. And I'm like, okay, great. Now I got to find a new thing. It's just, it really helps me to keep it to perspective, that money doesn't grow on trees, right? And money does make the world go round, or doesn't it? Right. So when we think about as women, like when it comes time for performance review time, and, knowing our worth and negotiating and, equal pay, those are all important things that, I think about all the time. And it comes from that. Money doesn't grow on trees.
Yeah. So yes, I have heard that as well. And and also, if you also think about the mindset that has, I want to take a moment to honor all of the mountains, so to speak, that you've climbed and all the amazing things that you've already done. Can you think of the mindset that's helped you get there? Because a lot of times what I'm seeing after working with, Olympians and people in, companies such as Accenture, but also technology across all sectors, is that there's a lot of parallels in between. And so I'm really interested to know, what can you share a mindset that has helped you achieve the success that you've achieved up to this point?
So I think for mindset, it's really, once you accomplish one goal, you got to set another, right? A lot of times we have a list of goals that we create or things that we want to do. And then once we're done, we check it off the list, right? And that's it. So, what I try to do, whether it's personally or professionally, is whenever I reach a goal, I celebrate it, number one, because we don't do that as women enough. And, we can talk about that too. But, I celebrate the fact that I crushed this goal, or that I met this goal, or I surpassed this goal. And then it's what's next. What am I going to do next? What is my next goal? There's always something that you want to do, need to do, have to do, can do next. So for me, my mindset is set a goal, crush it, set a new goal. And then, just keep that rotation going. And that helps me to stay on my toes, but it also helps me with accountability too. So that's one mindset that I really like is crush a goal, set a new one.
Yeah, so that's perfect. And I want to add to that, it's just been proven, and a lot of times you've probably achieved these goals with the help or the accountability of someone else. So if you can, rope someone else into it, or maybe speak up for some help when needed or what have you, then that's always a good idea as well. And what I'm hearing, even before we got on this call, is that, and also some of the things you're just sharing, is that it's really important for women to be advocates for themselves, because we're going to start having the conversation about, implicit bias and, how to really have culture change. But also I want to ask, let's start off with what is our responsibility in that? And then what can we do to take some ownership of, speaking up and being heard in the workplace and having the recognition and respect that we want and deserve?
So I would say that's one of the mistakes that I am, or, one of the things that I'm growing in is really being able to, speak up for myself, right? And really being able to tell my story, because I'm the scholar of my story, right? I can tell it the best, I know it the best, I can reference certain things. So I need to be able to tell my story, and I need to be able to speak up as well. If you are, thinking that, someone else is going to represent you, or someone else is going to say, what your goals are, what you've done, right? It's not always going to happen that way. So we have to know how to, talk about our accomplishments and the things that we're doing, and do that for others, right? For other women, right? So being able to speak up and being able to promote and being able to help other women as well. And I think about a time, so I have a really great friend, and she recently received an award, an honor. And she didn't really want to share it because she felt like this isn't the time. Like, this is a global pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't want to talk about this, 40 under 40 award, or, the award is. And I just said to her, well, why not? Right? You worked hard for this. Like, this is a recognition, and it's not being boastful, but you should celebrate it. You should share this, right? I found out about it, and it wasn't through you. And why is that? Like, you worked hard to get this, right? So we have to do a better job as women of being proud of what we're doing and sharing that. And then I made it my mission to let everybody know that she got this award, right? Because sometimes you have to do that. We have to promote each other. We have to uplift each other. So I posted about it. I let everybody, who we know, joint friends or joint colleagues or people that we know that we share, I let them know about it. Like, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it, because we have to do that. We have to be proud about our accomplishments. We have to be proud for each other. And not just, in the workplace, but personally as well. Like, we have to be more comfortable with speaking about who we are and what our accomplishments are, right? It's something that we have to do. And I'm really starting to learn that if I'm talking to you, Sheryl, about what I'm doing, I'm not boasting, right? Mm-hmm. I am simply sharing with you, like, some of the things that I like to talk about, or some of the things that I'm passionate about, or some of the things that I've done, because that's helping me, and that's helping you to learn about me in some ways that we can work together. That's not necessarily, boasting about myself. So I have really had to learn that and really take that outside of myself, but also with others, and to help them find their voices as well.
Yeah, and I think that is so important. I think we as women can do that more. I think all of us can do that more. And it's really talking about things that we're proud of. And also, if we don't talk about things that we're proud of, that we love doing, that we're passionate about, if we don't do that, then no one's going to know. But if we do that and an opportunity comes up, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, Latisha loves doing that. You need to reach out to her. Oh,
exactly.
But maybe it's something that's totally not directly related to what you're doing. But if you talk about it, then other people will know and be able to support you. So I love that, is really hitting home that that's mm-hmm. one way that we can, in order to be heard, we need to speak up.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, and I agree 100%, not to throw us women under the bus, but we're not as good at that as we should be. And I have a story that speaks directly to that. Was working with a woman, and as we were, in the first session getting to know each other, I'm like, oh, well, can you share some of the things that have transpired in the previous year? She's like, well, I'm responsible for the, 4 relationships that drive probably 20% of the revenue for a multi-billion-dollar company. And I was like, but she's like, I'm like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Why isn't it like, well, yeah, guess is what I've done. Like, isn't amazing? And so we're constantly kind of sweeping under the rug or belittling. And I don't mean belittling in a bad way, but I've seen it. I agree with you 100%.
We're humble. We try to be humble about it,
But it's not only that it's not serving us, it's not serving others.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And so what is something that when you think of a culture, like, in a company as big as, Accenture, or other companies, what is a way that we can take control, but also that cultures can really start to shift? And speaking along those lines, can you take a little, I'm sure that's more of a conversation than the time that we have together, but can we just talk maybe about implicit bias? Because I feel like there's a lot of good people. Most people probably consider them good. They're not trying to do anything bad, but they do it implicitly. So can you help shine a little light on that? And is that one area that we can all learn and improve?
Yeah, so you're right. Accenture is a huge company, a huge global company. And, we were talking earlier and I just said, with Accenture it's I&D, right? Because for us, the inclusion comes before diversity, right? That's the most important part. And, one of the things that I say all the time and I hear people say is, inclusion is being invited to the party, diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is, asking someone to dance and then playing the music that they like. Right. So it's not just about inviting them there to the table, to the party. It's about actually including them in what's going on, including them in the conversations that are happening, right? Including them in the, diverse slate panel, right? It's about the actual inclusion part of things. Like that's what's important to us and what's important to me. So when you're thinking about how you can shift a culture, the mindset that we usually use is inclusion, right? So how do we include everybody that needs to be included? So when we're having these conversations about, what's the diversity strategy going to be, we're including our employee resource group leaders in those conversations, right? When we are having conversations about, what's needed, like what types of trainings or opportunities do we need to fill the gap? We're actually having focus groups with our people. We're talking to them to see what they want. So it's not just a lot of people, who are totally disjointed and disconnected, making those decisions, right? We try to include the right people, the right stakeholders, the people who are going to be affected. We try to include them, right? So when you're thinking about cultural change, you have to include the people who you may not normally include in these conversations. So being intentional about, who you're talking to and change the culture. But then it's really about, belonging, right? Because even now it's even more evident, but there are so many people who are affected by the pandemic. So we hear this term often in the diversity space, authentic self, right? Be authentic, like show up as your authentic self. But we have to be willing to accept people for who they are authentically, right? We need to get to a place where people aren't hiding who they are. They aren't hiding that they have a same-sex spouse, right? Or they aren't hiding that they're a single mom, or they aren't hiding that they want to leave at 5 o'clock because they want to go to yoga class, right? So it's not always just about, parents when it comes to, the whole work-life balance and inclusion, right? There are people who have other things that are important to them. So, when we're changing the culture, we have to be open to things that everybody wants to do, not just, this diverse segment or, this segment, right? It's about making everybody feel like they belong and they can be who they want to be. And then setting that example, right? Like if you're a leader on your team, set that example by inviting, this, just bring your, instead of saying spouse, say significant other, like that's more inclusive, right? Instead of assuming genders, right? Ask, like, what is your gender? A lot of companies now are having, you can have your preferred gender, as a part of your HR records, or, you can put that into your signature or name badges when you're going to conferences. So, in order to change the culture, we really need to look at it from an inclusion perspective.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then if you don't mind, I want to ask you a question that might be a little awkward or uncomfortable, but just keep it anonymous. But I'm wondering, is there been something that you can give us an example of where this has gone horribly wrong?
That is hard, right? Because now I'm like, let me put on my diversity practitioner hat, right? Which is so important in the space, which is, keeping confidentiality and doing things. But, sometimes it does go horribly wrong because of implicit bias, right? Or unconscious bias, right? So, sometimes, we are trying to be inclusive, but there's that one person, right, who's just not there yet, which is why a lot of times we have to meet people where they are. So you can't do like a huge cultural shift. Like you can't just, hey, we're making this huge change right now. It has to be gradual. There has to be training. There has to be change management. But if I think about an example where, that has gone terribly wrong and I have witnessed this, right, is, a lot of times, and I get asked this a lot too, and I know a lot of moms do, but whenever I'm traveling or I'm at an event, people always ask me like, well, where's Sydney, right? And I'm always like, what do you mean, where is she? She's with her dad, right? Like, like that's where she is. But I feel like a lot of times there is an assumption, right, that women are solely caregivers, or that, if we're being totally honest, that a lot of times, Black women may be single moms, right? There's this assumption there. So for me, in that instance, it went terribly wrong because I'm sitting there looking like, well, where else would she be, right? Like
it's almost like you feel like, I just left her on the street corner.
Right, exactly, right. Like, and my whole thing is like, you wouldn't, like, if you would not, that's only something that you would say to a woman, right? Like, you would not say that to John. You wouldn't go to John and say, hey, John, I'm so glad you were able to make this conference. Where are your kids? You wouldn't say that to John, right? So that's an instance where, someone may have been trying to, just make conversation with me, but it kind of went left, because then at that point I was offended, because I was like, what do you mean, where is she?
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's with her dad. Like, where are your kids? And that's kind of where the conversation went. And that's where like my emotional intelligence comes in, right? Because I had to flip it and make a joke out of it, but had to like really say, like, really, like, could I ask you that? And then he thought about it and he was like, well, I guess you're right. And I bet he wouldn't ask another woman where her kids are, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they're at conference or things like that. So, that's an example that I can share. And I try to use examples for myself because, again, like you said, like, it's really hard to use examples for other people. But for me, that's an example where, I think those conversations kind of went left. But it happens so often for women, right? Where there's this assumption that, where are the kids?
Yeah. And I just want to also emphasize something that you said that's so important, is that, flipping your emotional intelligence, because that is really an opportunity for growth.
Mm-hmm.
If you're able to access that. But if you're triggered and your emotions go left along with the conversation, they're going to be like, whoa, what's wrong with her? Like, they learn nothing from it. But in the way that you handled it, and it's a lot of the things that, you teach as well, as far as how to be emotionally agile, which you did really amazing. This person will likely think twice before he makes that comment again. It's just like, I'm really glad that you're here. And it won't, happen again. So,
yeah. And then, emotional intelligence is something that, we all need. And it's something that we don't necessarily master, right? But it's something that you really have to think about, like knowing how to respond to a situation, or almost what's the right way to go about doing it. It can be complicated. And a lot of times you have to think on your feet, but we have to do it. And that plays a lot into, diversity and inclusion and belonging, but just even us as women, right? A lot of times we have to use them, but there are a lot of microaggressions that happen to us as women where we have to think about, how do I respond, or do I respond? Because in not all instances is it worth a response, or does it warrant a response? So we have to know how to respond.
Mm-hmm. And then one thing that was brought to my attention last year, and I'll tell you what this has to do with you and the topic that we're talking about, is when I interviewed Kelly McElhaney, who's a distinguished professor at the UC Berkeley Haas School of Business. Mm-hmm. And she's also the founder for Equity, Gender, and Leadership. And she was saying, and I'm embarrassed to say that it put me back on my heels when she said this, because I hadn't actually processed it in my own mind before hearing it from her, because we were talking about, women in the workplace. And she's like, well, you have to understand that there's a lot of inequities within our gender. And I was like, why did I not think of that, before? And so, two questions, kind of a double sorted question is, first of all, what's the difference between, can you explain the difference between implicit and explicit bias? I'm assuming one is intentional and one is maybe you didn't know what you were doing. That's my understanding. And then also, is there any way that we can help shift culture change for those who feel further marginalized? And this could be the gamut. We're not having a color conversation. It could be like you were talking about earlier. It could be someone who is in a same-sex relationship. It could be someone who is a veteran. It could be like, who knows? Veterans go through a lot of things because they assume that they have
PTSD.
Yeah. Like all veterans have PTSD, and they're like, no. So anyway, so if you can explain the difference between those two, and also when we think about how to really focus our efforts and shift cultures for groups that are further marginalized, how could we be more aware to create more change?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few, examples that I can use for the difference between implicit and explicit bias, or, unconscious bias is another term that we use. But, I'll give you an example, and a lot of them will be pertaining to me just because, or hypothetically me, right? But when all the rioting was happening a few months ago, I was having a conversation with some people on my team, and someone asked me, oh, so you were out there all night too, right?
Oh my God, really?
So again, this is me. I had to stop and think, like, why would you assume that I was out there, right? And that's what I asked, right? So here is my opportunity to educate, but also to understand, where that thought came from. Like, why did you think you need to ask me? And that's what I said. I was like, well, what makes you think that I was out there, right? And he was like, yeah, well, I mean, every every Black person I knew, was out there, and they were protesting and they were mad. And, I said, well, not everybody, displays like their feelings and their emotions the same way. So everybody I know didn't flock, downtown DC to protest, and I was not one of them. And, once I said that to him, he's like, okay, like, I get it. And I said to him, like, and this was a teachable moment. And I said, you shouldn't assume that, just because, one race or somebody's doing something, that everybody does it, right? And I was like, and there's several reasons why I didn't do it, but I don't have to tell you what those reasons were. I don't have to say to you, well, no, I wasn't out there because I didn't have a babysitter because I'm a woman, and that's the assumption too, right? Or no, I wasn't. I didn't go out there because I was afraid of the violence, or whatever the case may be. I didn't have to understand that, but that to me was explicit bias, right? You made an assumption based on, who my race. You made an assumption that I was out doing something because of who I am, right? Whereas an example of, unconscious bias is when, I may be talking to you, Sheryl, and I may assume that you are Jewish, right? And it happens on both ends, right? I may assume that you are Jewish because of your last name, right? And I may say something to you, and then you come back to me and say, oh no, well, I'm actually not Jewish. There could be a story behind it where you married someone who was Jewish, but you didn't convert, or whatever the case may be. But I have made an assumption, based off of something that I know or that I think to know. So I have made an assumption that you're Jewish because of your last name, because I know a Jewish person that has that last name. That is something that is more so like, I really didn't understand. Like, I just thought, because I know people who have that last name who are Jewish, and I automatically equated to you. So that to me would be the difference, right? I was making an educated guess off of some information that was given to me that was wrong, right? And then you let me know, oh no, well, this isn't necessarily a Jewish last name. There are some Jewish people, and then I know that, so I can take that with me. So now I won't assume that someone with your last name is Jewish. But in the other instance, that was more of a stereotype, which is different. A stereotype is different from, me honestly not knowing that this wasn't the case. So those are the differences.
Okay, so that is actually different than I thought, because no, it is, because I thought it had to do with intention or So thank you. I appreciate you pointing that out. And I think that there is a common theme that I'm understanding. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's, excuse me, it's really being able to speak up, but being able to be emotionally agile in these conversations to really capture these learning moments. And culture shift is going to happen, you know, in a broad level with, you know, policies and rules and all these things, but also where there's going to be an important shift is in those crucial conversations by either the virtual or not virtual water cooler, for people to be very emotionally agile and say, well, hang on, you know, and to really do, you know, what you were able to do. And if we can all do that more consistently, then I think it will add up to a really huge impact and have a ripple effect.
And the intentional piece, because I did want to address it, that's more so around like aggressions and microaggressions. So that's more so when someone is being intentional about, you know, what they're saying, like we would consider that a microaggression. I mean, there's so many terms out here, but I know you've heard the term microaggressions a lot too. So that would be more of a, like, you intended to say something to hurt me, or you intended to say something that is stereotypical, or, you know, it's more like, and we call those aggressions. So you were aggressive with me because of something that you are perceiving about me, or something that you've heard about me that is based in, you know, your thoughts or your beliefs about me as a person. So
yeah, and that seems like a whole new level.
It is. We don't have time for that, Sheryl.
That'll be another conversation. So, well, before we sign off, I know you're up to a lot of amazing things. So why don't you take a minute to tell us about that, and about this hashtag, and what is that all about, and how can we follow you?
Right. So the hashtag Lead with Latisha, I'm actually going to launch my website soon, Lead with Latisha, which is really going to be based around some of the things we're talking about. I'm going to be sharing, you know, some of my thought leadership around, you know, things in the diversity space, but just around like navigating our careers as women. You know, some of the things that we can do. I'll be, you know, featuring different people, you know, to come on and talk about, you know, different initiatives that they have happening. I'll be highlighting different, you know, entrepreneurs and different businesses. So it's really more so a brand that I'm launching, so that I can reach more women, more young women, more females. And I'm really excited about it. So right now, if you want to follow me before the website launches, and I'm targeting December, I'll keep you posted on that one. But if you want to follow me, you can follow the hashtag on Instagram, on Twitter, and on LinkedIn. And you can follow me on LinkedIn or any of those social media platforms, just to get all the information now. So I'm posting quite frequently, you know, having conversations with people, engaging, sharing different information, different themes, giving some tips and skills and tricks. And it's pretty going to be fun. So I'm looking forward to it. Pretty fun and informative.
Yeah, so that's exciting. I will be following you for sure. Glad to have you also in our Fearless Female Leader group on LinkedIn, which you guys can check that out as well. But be sure to look up the hashtag Lead with Latisha. I believe you said Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn?
Yes, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. You can find me with that hashtag. Yeah.
Okay, so wherever you are hanging out with social, be sure to check it out. And, you know, as I like to say, together we can go far. So I want to congratulate you and show some gratitude for you really leading the movement on helping women to speak up and be heard in the workplace. And it was really a pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you. This was so much fun. We'll have to do it again soon.
Yeah, I'll look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.